Hi, I'm Miss Tyler and welcome to the new Context for Kids studio, almost finished. This week we're going to talk about Torah portion bow. So I hope you're really excited because I'm really excited. Okay, so this week Torah portion bow means come, and it's Exodus 10:1 to 13:6, and we're going to finish out the plagues. Now, we're not going to talk about Passover. We're actually going to talk about Passover in a special teaching in April. Today I want to talk to you about the concept of regional gods. What I really want to talk to you about is the plague of darkness because it's just really cool. And then I'm going to kind of get into the Egyptian calendar, but if you really want to learn about the Egyptian calendar and how crazy it was, check out my blog on theancientbridge.com later on in the week. I should be posting it on Thursday. Okay, so regional gods. You know, it wasn't such a big deal to Pharaoh, a lot of the things that God was doing. After all, Pharaoh's magicians were able to make their staffs into snakes. They were able to turn water into blood. They were able to make frogs appear, and I believe they were even able to make gnats. So, you know, Pharaoh was like, yawn. But there was one thing that was going to start impressing Pharaoh. And the thing that was going to impress him the most is when God showed him that he has authority in Pharaoh's domain. And he has the authority to make things happen or not happen in different areas. In the ancient Near East, gods were regional. As a matter of fact, there's a really funny situation in the book of Joshua where they're attacking some people, or some people are attacking them, and they say, oh, well, these guys beat us in the valleys, so their God must be the God of valleys. Let's attack him in the mountains. And so they attack him in the mountains thinking that our God is only able to save them in the valleys. Well, of course, we know that our God can save us anywhere. But in the ancient Near Eastern world, they didn't worship gods like that. They thought that a God had a limited domain. And so when our God started making plagues in Egypt, here we see, you know, he's just taken out everything and it's everywhere. But when he started exempting the land of Goshen, where his people were, when he started exempting the houses of Israelites, especially when we come to the plague of darkness, that's a really huge deal. It showed that our God isn't just the kind, you know, you get somebody, you ever heard the phrase, you couldn't hit the broadside of the barn, you know, when you're shooting basketball or when you're shooting a gun. Well, their gods were kind of were like shotgun blast, bang, you know, big old area, the shooting, whoever gets hurt gets hurt. When God was able to exempt certain regions, that was starting to show Pharaoh that God wasn't like their gods. He wasn't a regional God. He could, more like a surgeon. He could make things happen here, he could make things happen there, and he could make things not happen here. That was really unusual. That was really unusual. So, keep that in mind when you're looking through the plagues. To us, sometimes, you know, we read these accounts and, oh, well, he exempted, you know, the Hebrews, big deal. It was a really big deal. Okay, what I really have been wanting to talk to you this week about is the plague of darkness. Because everybody knows I love studying Egypt because, like I say every week, Egypt shows up in the Bible over and over and over again, and not just when they leave Egypt. Israel was born in Egypt. And Egypt influenced a lot of the ways they think and feel and believe. And even we can see in the teachings about, or in the things that they say about the heart, their ideas matched up with the Egyptians really with the entire world, and I blogged about that last week on my blog. You might want to check that out. It's really, really a cool story. Anyway, the plague of darkness. The ancient Egyptians had some of the most interesting... That wasn't supposed to happen. The Egyptians had some of the most interesting sun god mythology in the ancient Near East. Now, all of the different countries had sun gods. Well, of course they did. They all had a sun in the sky, and remember, they didn't have science. They were mathematicians and great engineers. So great that we can't even figure out a lot of the things that they did. But they didn't have science. They didn't look up at the sun in the sky and try and figure out, well, what could it possibly be? They didn't look at, a seed going into the ground and really think how it happened. They credited the act of growing to the gods. And Israel was no different. When they would plant a seed, they would say it sprouted and it grew because of God, and it rained because of God, and the sun was shining because it's an act of God. Now, we look at the sun up in the sky and we say, well, that's a self-contained nuclear reaction, fission reaction. Very oversimplified. But when we look at things, we say, oh, well, what are the stars? Well, they thought about it too. They thought, oh, they must be gods. They must be angels. They must be our dead ancestors. It must be something. They didn't think scientifically. And so all the different cultures had different stories about the sun what the sun was. Well, the Egyptians had this idea that the sun was a boat that was being rowed by the god Re or Ra. Remember that ancient Egyptian, no one could speak it anymore as of about 500 BC. And still today, they unlocked the language with a Rosetta Stone, but we don't have any idea what vowels they put into words. So we're really guessing. The Egyptian language is like they've had 5 languages now. They speak Arabic now. And so, we have no idea how to really say any of their gods' names. So some people say Ra, some people say Re, whatever. Don't worry about it. So I say Re. So they've got Re rowing his sunbark across the sky. And at night, they believed that it was dark because he would row into the underworld. Okay? They weren't clear on the concept of what was happening with the sun. So he would go into the underworld and he would have to fight all these terrible demons. And my favorite thing that he had to fight was Apophis, who was this ginormous serpent that would attack him every night. And, they had this epic battle. And, they knew that if they did not worship Re, if they did not go to, if his priest did not feed him in his temple every day and take care of him, that he wasn't going to be able to survive the battle with Apophis. And the sun wouldn't come up. This was terrifying for them. Do you imagine a world without a sun? Well, every day they knew that Re could be defeated by Apophis. And so what do you think would be going on in the minds of the Egyptians when all of a sudden, for 3 days, there was nothing but darkness? And if there was nothing but absolute darkness, it's not just the sun, it's the moon. There's no light. Something has gone on very terrible in the underworld. And Re, the god, their sun god, has been destroyed by Apophis. And it's because of the God of the Hebrews. This would have been horrific. Or, they're assuming that the God of the Hebrews has killed Re himself. As far as they're concerned, the sun is never coming up again. this is horrible. I'm going to show you a bit. This is, of course, we know that that's not what happened, but I'm going to give you one more piece of context because this is really funny. So, Ray's down there, rowing his sun barge through the underworld all night, fighting Apophis, cuts his head off, cuts him to pieces, and then he comes up in the morning and they were so convinced he was tired that they would erect one of these. Okay, and this is called a sun needle. Now, the sun needle was for Ray's bark to rest on after he'd gotten a certain portion into the sky. I mean, they were serious. This wasn't a joke to them. This was really serious. They thought, they put the sun needle, and when the Greeks saw them, they said, those look like meat skewers. Like a shish kebab? Yeah. And so they called them the name that they gave to meat skewers, which was obeliskoi. Obelisk is our word today, and it all came from the Greeks looking at the sun needles that Ra was supposed to rest on and saying, oh look, big meat skewers. So anyway, that's funny. The Greeks always had their interesting ideas. Okay, so one of the things, and I'm just going to be really quick with this one. One of the things that people often ask about is, well, why, when they came out of Egypt, did God institute the Sabbath on the seventh day? Why did he make a point of doing that? And why did he say to Aaron and Moses, this is the beginning of months for you? Well, the Hebrews had been slaves for over 80 years. We know this because we know that the Pharaoh we know that it was after the enslavement of the Israelites that Pharaoh commanded that the babies be thrown into the Nile. Okay? And so they've been slaves all this time. Well, slaves don't get days off. Slaves don't get to observe their own calendar. Okay, so sometime between 80 and 250 years they've been there. We don't know what they were doing, but we do know that for at least 80 years they were not in control of their own lives. And the Egyptian calendar was nuts. The Egyptian calendar had 12 months, just like everyone else's calendar, but unlike the other calendars in the ancient Near East, their months were all 30 days long, but they only had 3 weeks. 3 10-day weeks. And then, because the solar year is 365 days, they had a legend about why there were 5 extra days, and those 5 days were not considered days of the year. These were 5 days that happened in the summer, or at the inundation of the Nile, which is when it would flood, and bring the silt down, and this was good for the land. It would flood it. They kind of had flood irrigation. This is how they would grow their crops. And the river would bring silt from other ways, so it would bring rich soil. That's why Goshen was so fertile. And so they had this story that the reason they had 5 extra days was because the goddess Nut had been cursed by her father that she could not have children any day of the year. And so she got into a contest with the god Thoth, who was we talked about him last week. He was one of the only gods who could read and write. So embarrassing. Gods just aren't what they used to be. So she won 5 extra days from Thoth that were not days of the year, and they were at the end of the year at the inundation of the Nile in the summer. And on those 5 days, because they weren't days of the year, she could have children. And so on the first day, she had Osiris. On the second day, she had Horus. And on the third day, she had Set, who was very evil. And then on the 4th day, she had Isis. And then on the 5th day, she had Nephthys. So really, it's interesting how they thought, but I'm going to blog more on that so you can get the whole story. So that is our Torah portion for this week. Well, that's it for this week, and I just wanted to encourage you to support children's ministry. Check out my sister ministries, TorahPuppets.com, and Whatever is Lovely Publications. Sarah's written a wonderful book called Lessons in Yeshua's Torah, and it will take you through the Torah portions that we're going through in the order, and it will help you a lot if you're doing this for the first time, especially with little kids. Stan Randall's Torah Puppets, it's actually a family affair. He has his entire family as puppeteers, his kids, and they're all working on it. It's a zany, fun way to go through the Bible, and he's coming out with new episodes on the book of Exodus, so hopefully very soon you'll be seeing those. And remember, he has a YouTube channel too called Torah Puppet. No, called Stanley Randall, sorry. And then, of course, there's Context for Kids, and of course, you can buy my book, Context for Kids, Honor and Shame in the Bible, and Sarah Hawk Valente's Lessons in Yeshua's Torah on Amazon.com. So, we'll see you next week. This has been weird filming not on the laptop because I'm used to looking at myself, so if I seem uncomfortable, it's because I really am. But next week, you know what? We're learning together. We'll get better at this. I want you to know that I love you, and I'm praying for you, and I want you to have a wonderful week studying the scripture together.